Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. The clock is ticking with just a few days remaining before Canadians head to the polls. The 2025 election is gaining momentum and all attention is focused on the final stretch. According to the latest projections from YouGov, Mark Carney's resistance to be proposed tariffs by Donald Trump has boosted confidence among voters, with 41% of Canadians say they trust Carney on US relations compared to just 26% for Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. A new Ipsos poll shows the Liberals holding a slim lead over the Conservatives, with other parties like the NDP and Bloc Québécois also seeing notable support. However, the race remains tight as the gap between the two main parties falls within the margin of error, making the outcome still very uncertain. In the final debate held in Montreal, Carney framed the stakes in stark terms, warning that Donald Trump is trying to fundamentally change the world economy. He's trying to break us so that the US can own us, is what he stated. Poilievre, on the other hand, accused the Liberals of weakening Canada's economy, citing anti-energy legislation and high taxes that he says have driven investment south of the border. As the campaign enters its final stretch, all eyes are whether on Carney can convert this surge in support into a decisive mandate at the ballot box. Now let's dive into a discussion on the Canadian polls. We are now joined by Amanda Gilbraith, a Canadian commentator. Thank you very much, Amanda, for joining us. Our first question to you is, given President Trump's recent imposition of 25% tariffs on Canadian imports and his provocative remarks about Canada potentially becoming the 51st state, how should Canadian Conservatives navigate the complexities of US-Canada relations while safeguarding national sovereignty?
I think Canadian Conservatives, as you've seen, have really shifted since Trump made this threat to an anti-Trump or certainly an anti-51st state agenda here in messaging. We really, as a country, are rallying around more of a sovereigntist, national language. Isn't typical for Canadians. And I think Conservatives really need to channel that kind of energy, that expectation. We've seen former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, for example, who's sort of the grandfather of the conservative movement in the country, the modern conservative movement, speak up very vocally around his feelings that we have to fight tooth and nail around that. So I think the more Conservatives can kind of channel Canadians' anger and frustration, while also understanding that we do have to have diplomatic relations with the US, will be critical.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has both criticised and sought alignment with Trump on certain policies. How effectively can he balance a strong nationalistic approach with the practical need for a cooperative relationship with the United States?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if he sought alignment with Trump. I think the fact that they're both titular leaders of conservative movements, although you could argue Trump's a leader of much more of a populist style movement than a conservative movement per se. Certainly not what you would expect as conservatism in Canada. There's some alignment on some policy, like, for example, basic principles of cutting taxes, reducing the size of government. I mean, those are things that they would see alignment on. But I think broadly, we see conservatives in the country understand the existential threat that the U.S. currently faces, challenges Canada with, and including talking about beefing up spending on our military, something that Conservatives talked about quite a while, increasing our focus on building energy and pipelines across the country so that we can be more reliant on our own natural resources, which are bountiful and frankly a very, I think, attractive resource that we could push around the world, not to the U.S. but to other markets. So Conservatives are certainly talking about diversifying our economy, diversifying our trading partner, and repatriating and strengthening how we protect our own borders, particularly in the north, are things I think they need to do.
Moving on now, the Conservative platform includes tax reductions and the elimination of the carbon tax. How do these measures address current economic challenges and what are their potential long-term impacts on Canada's fiscal health?
So affordability is a major issue in Canada, as I know is in other jurisdictions around the world, but it's being felt very acutely here, particularly since the ascent of Donald Trump in the U.S. The stock markets here have been crazy. A lot of investment has either been stalled or removed or frozen out. We've seen layoffs in certain major sectors, including the auto sector, the steel sector. So focusing on affordability on tax cuts, I think, is a real important thing. You're seeing that in all parties, but certainly the Conservatives have come forth with probably the deepest of those cuts, which is, again, typical with what a Conservative government would propose. And I think meeting the moment, certainly in that way. With respect to the carbon tax, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have campaigned for a long time around that is not a viable option for Canadians if we want to keep life affordable here at this time. That proved to be very popular to the point where the Liberal government, who had brought in and championed the carbon tax, then cut it, right? They removed it. Mark Carney, who's the current Liberal leader and our Prime Minister, has rescinded that himself. We saw, for example, gas prices here fall by 20 cents a litre overnight once it was implemented, which is wild. And I think speaks to how that carbon tax has been artificially inflating costs for Canadians every day. So I think that is an important thing to keep things affordable, especially as we deal with these tough economic times.
Amanda, Mark Carney has emphasised the removal of interprovincial trade barriers as a means to bolster the economy. What is the Conservative perspective on this approach, and are there alternative strategies being proposed?
All political parties have been talking about the interprovincial trade barrier. Certainly Mark Carney's come forward with ideas on that. I think also Pierre Poilievre have spoken about it very vocally in the past. It's an important thing that Canadians have latched onto. We've actually seen premiers or the leaders of our provinces here begin to roll out that strategy in the interim. While there's an election even ongoing, we've seen some deals just be launched between Ontario, which is our most populous province, and some of the Atlantic Canadian provinces, which are less populous, but certainly a big part of those barriers. So I think all parties are in favor of this. Mark Carney, by just benefit of being Prime Minister, was able to ink a deal with the provinces. But my guess, if you were to have a Conservative government or a Liberal government, it would be at the top of their docket to deal with that issue.
Now moving on with Mark Carney's background as a central banker and his recent entry into politics, how does his leadership style and experience compare to Pierre Poilievre's more traditional political trajectory? And what implications does this have on their respective visions for Canada?
Mark Carney is not a practiced politician. We've seen that on, as he's campaigned. It's been interesting even throughout the campaign period, which is here just over 36 days. Mark Carney spent at least over a week now in what we call being Prime Minister. So he steps off the campaign trail and either does cabinet committee meetings. And some of these have been necessary, some of these have been not. But I think part of that is that he's much more comfortable in the role of PM than he is of actually shaking hands, kissing babies, that more traditional campaign approach that we see Pierre Poilievre very much take to, and very much what to do, given he's been in political life for 20 plus years. So kind of the persona that Mark Carney's portrayed to Canadians is like calm, almost boring at some times. He certainly isn't overly clippable, as we would say, or someone to quote. But that seems to be what is really comforting Canadians, right? As we look at the U.S., at the bombasticness of President Trump, the idea, I think, of having a former central banker, someone who's calm, the adult in the room, has been appealing to a vast majority of voters and voters who, frankly, more typically would vote Conservative. So that's certainly been something to benefit him. I think a longer election period, he would have bigger challenges because he's so new to this. We've seen some gaps, but none of them have really stuck. Pierre Poilievre, on the other end, is a much more experienced politician. We see him having these mega rallies across the country, so 6,000 to 7,000 people at a political rally, which is unheard of in Canada, truly unheard of. And he's got a really motivated, base of support in the country to do that. But he doesn't have, certainly the experience that Mark Carney would have on the international stage. That being said, he's actually been in the country for the last, 20 years, unlike Mark Carney, who has not lived here probably for at least the last decade. So Canadians will see which one they prefer, but certainly it is different approaches and different experiences for both leaders.
Now, Amanda, considering Jagmeet Singh's leadership of the NDP and his influence in previous minority governments, what role might he play in the formation of the next government, if any, and how could this affect Conservative strategies?
No, I think Jagmeet Singh's done once this election is is over. He has led his party to probably their largest defeat in the history. He will have led his party to the biggest defeat in the history of the NDP. And a big part of that is strategically, had he actually stopped propping up the Trudeau government in the summer, he might be official opposition status. And instead, he hung on to that government, propped them up unnecessarily for months and months and months. And Canadians have taken a look at what he's offered them, and there's a possibility they're down to likely single-digit seats. He may not even get his own seat. So I think Jagmeet Singh's ability to play kingmaker or push policies is well past his best before date. Canadians have taken a look at him and his leadership and decided they are not interested, and they do not take him seriously to lead Canadians in a crisis. So my guess is the NDP is going to be thrown into leadership very quickly after the election is over.
Reports suggest that Khalistani groups may play a significant role in the upcoming election. How should Canadian Conservatives address concerns about foreign influence and ensure the integrity of the electoral process?
Yeah, so there's concerns about a wide variety of groups, Russia, even China interfering in some way or another. There were just reports from SITE, which is a kind of a nonpartisan government organization that monitors, that said there has been some interference from other governments, particularly the Chinese government, in relation to one Conservative candidate. So obviously Conservatives, I think, need to remain vigilant. They need to understand and integrate with different communities to, gather the information that's out there, report it up. But I think the best strategy for them is to focus on mobilizing their own supporters, and where we see inappropriate behavior by other movements, particularly, and we know that some of that has happened around the NDP, they need to be pointing that out and flagging that for authorities.
In light of allegations of foreign interference in Canadian politics, what measures are being proposed to protect Canada's democratic institutions, and how do Conservatives plan to implement them?
Yeah, he's certainly, I know, spoken about and advocated for that movement, which is, and voters will obviously hold him to account if he so chooses, if they so choose to do so. I think, broadly, the Khalistani movement has not gained traction anywhere nationally across the country. It's certainly active in certain areas like the Vancouver region, some parts of Toronto as well. But, I think Canadian Conservatives need to offer a choice. And I would say in BC, they're certainly in tight races with the NDP in certain spots, or to the Liberals. But, the NDP support has cratered. It is, single digits in many places. They're unlikely to get any substantive amount of seats. And I think that tells you a lot about where they've just decided to park their vote and their support.
Amanda, recent polls indicate a narrowing gap between the Conservatives and the Liberals. What factors are contributing to this shift, and how should the Conservatives campaign adapt to maintain or regain momentum?
So the measures being proposed, obviously there's been a national review that took place, an inquiry into foreign interference. There's two full reports that have come out of that from the government. Conservatives have criticized some of the contents of that, and the way they were conducted as not being thorough enough and not taking the issue seriously enough. I think, government itself needs to monitor this. We need to be calling out these issues. And candidly, a lot of this is happening on social media, right? So I think we need to make sure that the government is working proactively with various platforms to stop, to flag this, to understand their processes, so we can stop misinformation from being propagated across the country. Now, do I think it's a major issue influencing ridings across? No, I do not, but I certainly think there's select areas where there are targeted campaigns and what to do. So calling that out publicly is important, but also being alert and monitoring for new techniques and the way that is done will be critical for any government.
Now, finally, with increasing voter concerns about economic stability and national sovereignty, what strategies should Conservatives employ to effectively engage with the electorate and address their priorities?
Yeah, I think those are interesting polls. I think there's a lot of happening across the country. So it's one thing for a national number, but given we have a parliamentary system where, the popular vote doesn't necessarily deliver government. In fact, the last two elections, the Conservatives won the popular vote, but the Liberals won a minority government. I think we need to take those with a grain of salt to a certain extent. The focus for all parties, but in particular the Conservatives, need to be on getting out the vote, right? They need to be on managing those target seats, on pushing in various regions for folks to mobilize their support, to get out in advance ballots. We've had the last 4 days. Advanced voting has been happening. It's the largest reported turnout in Canadian history. Over 2 million people voted on money. That's never a Friday. It's never happened before in this country. So I think that is important to do. But I for one, I'm a bit skeptical as far as a huge momentum shift at this point. I think what might be happening is, given all the discussion of the Liberal majority, some of those NDP voters who had gone over to the Liberals to sort of stop the Conservatives may be migrating back on that side. So I think there's a softening of the Liberal vote, but there's about 7 days left till this election day. So I'm not sure if it's enough time, but certainly Conservatives are going to do everything they can to take advantage of it.
Amanda Galbraith, thank you very much for joining us. Let's now take a look at some of the numbers and at where some of the parties are polling. As you can see, here we have the CBC News Poll Tracker, which was published on the 22nd of April 2025. You can see Mark Carney's Liberal Party of Canada leading the polls with 42.7% of the vote, of the projected vote. Following up swiftly behind, we have the Conservative Party of Canada, led by Pierre Poilievre, with 38.3% of the vote. So trailing not very far behind, but behind yet still. Then we have Jagmeet Singh's New Democrat Party with polling with just 8.4% of the vote on that poll. We now move on to the Nanos Research poll, which also has Mark Carney's Liberal Party of Canada leading with 44.1% of the projections. Then shortly followed once again, this time a little bit more of a gap between them, with the Conservative Party of Canada coming in at 38.5%. We then have the New Democrat Party, Jagmeet Singh's, with 7.7% of the vote. It is followed by the party of Bloc Québécois with 5.4%. And then you can see other minority parties are obtaining 4.3% of the national projected vote. That's the Nanos Research poll. We then follow on to the research company Federal Poll Tracker. This was on the 20th of April. And once again, it has Mark Carney's Liberal Party of Canada at 43%, then followed by Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party at 38%. And then once again, Jagmeet Singh's New Democrat Party at 8% and Bloc Québécois at 6%, with other parties at 5%. We have a liaison strategies on which was published on the 19th of April 2025. We once again have the Liberal Party at 43% and the Conservative Party at 38%. And then we have the New Democrat Party at 8%. You can see this pattern emerging of this tight race between the Liberal and the Conservative Party of Canada. Going forward, obviously the Liberals have a slight lead, which wasn't the case previously to Justin Trudeau when he was in power, but Mark Carney's stance on Trump has increased the popularity of the Liberals. And so now the opinion polls have the Liberal Party of Canada actually leading that charge in Canada's elections. Let's once again move on. This actually has the Conservative Party at 43%, so leading ahead of Canada's Liberal Party, which is at 9%, but once again very, very close. As you can see, once again, the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, they are very much trailing behind in that regard. Let's move on once again. As you can see, this is the pattern followed by a very tight race between the Canadian Liberals and the Canadian Conservatives. Okay, that's all we have time for. We will bring you more updates from Canada's election in the days coming forward. Thank you very much for joining us.